Good morning, everyone. Dan Bates, President and CEO, Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, and we are glad you could join us today for coffee and conversation. We're going to be hearing in just a little bit about a topic that may not sound exciting, but very, very, very important to you. So this is kind of information you need. It's like going to the doctor. You may not want to go to the doctor, but it's a really good idea if you do from time to time. So we're going to let Julia introduce herself in just a little bit. And this is the protocol. We are on a Zoom call, so you can either type your questions into the chat, or I'm sure that the presenter won't mind if you interrupt them and ask a question. If you're on Facebook Live, which is where usually our larger audience is, you can type your question in and Tiffany will repeat it to the speaker so we can get all your questions answered. So you know what we're going to do here. You know the protocol. We're going to get started. You know who I am. And now we're going to turn it over to who's doing self-introductions. Is that you, Laura?
Yep, I can do that. Not a problem.
Okay, Laura's going to do self-introductions. So we're going to find out who all of you are.
Yep, perfect. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Merrill with the Greater Hamilton Chamber. Glad to have you here today. Let's see here. So everyone, please tell me your name and what company you're with. Billy, we will start with you.
Hey, I'm Billy with Family Promise of Butler County, the only shelter in the county that takes the entire family.
Nice. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you.
And Zach.
Good morning, Zach Bohannon. I'm the Butler County Field Representative for Congressman Warren Davidson's office.
Glad to have you with us, Zach. And Gino.
Good morning. I'm Gino McGowan. I am the Director of Member Relations at the Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce.
And Tiffany.
Good morning. I'm Tiffany Grubb, Director of Marketing here at the Greater Hamilton Chamber.
Perfect. All right, Julie and Andy, I will let you do some introductions and take it away.
Perfect. I'll go through just brief and then hand it over to Andy. But my name is Julia Bowling. I am a business development manager with Sedgwick, a workers' comp third-party administrator. Andy?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Sawan. I am also with Sedgwick. I am a risk services specialist. Basically means that I work in the safety department here at Sedgwick for our customers.
Excellent. Okay, Laura, is it good if we go ahead and get started? And by all means, if anyone has questions, don't hesitate to interrupt. I think I can speak for Andy and myself. Don't hesitate to interrupt. Yeah, we welcome questions and comments. So with that, we'll get started. A little bit just about what we're going to talk about. First of all, we're going to talk about what to do for an employer, what to do if you have an injury, and who to call, what to do, why it's important. Then Andy is going to take over and talk about kind of the risk assessment part and from a risk and safety standpoint. So let me first get started with Ohio workers' comp. It's considered a no-fault state, meaning regardless of how the injury happened or where it happened or who is at fault, it is going to be at least considered as a workers' comp injury. And I say considered, not necessarily allowed, but at least it will be considered. In Ohio, we talk about injuries are compensable regardless of who's involved. So, you could be a manager and you have set the standards that everybody has to wear eye protection, and you find out that somebody maybe was welding and something ended up in their eye, and you could go back and say, well, I've told the person they should be wearing eye protection and they didn't have it on. Well, that could be obviously a contributing factor, but that is not necessarily going to be a factor that would disallow the claim. So again, it is a compensable state and it's no fault. There are exceptions there. We know that if injuries occur because there's been drugs or alcohol involved, then that will come into play. We need to demonstrate that there was a level of impairment, but again, that is a factor that will come into play. Self-inflicted injuries and then injuries resulting from horseplay are all exceptions to that. But again, I by no means want to imply that necessarily, any of those things necessarily means that it's a slam dunk that the claim would be disallowed. I've got definitions here as far as what, by Bureau standards, what is considered an injury. Easily said, really what we look at is in the course of and rising out of the employee's employment. So again, that's kind of what the guidelines the Bureau will use. We also will look at substantial aggravation or worsening of symptoms. You may have a situation where an employee has an existing condition, and they have made that known to you that they have this condition. And let's say, for instance, they have a back injury and they have restrictions that they can't lift over 20 pounds. You know, if part of their job, and if they go ahead and lift more than that, the condition gets worse, that could be a claim that would go on you, the employer, not necessarily the original employer. There we go. That I feel like that's me sometimes, like running through the halls at work. How's that? So let's talk a little bit about, you have an injury and what do we do? So the first thing is pretty obvious. You know, we want to make sure that the employee is all right. If 911 needs to be called, let's do that immediately. We can put everything else aside, paperwork and everything else. If 911 is what needs to be done, then let's call 911 and get that taken care of. Once you know that the situation is stabilized, we're going to start the investigation process. By all means, Andy's going to go into this in greater detail, but I'm going to just touch on a couple things. If the employee is able to do so, we're going to ask the employee to go ahead and complete the Bureau, either your accident form, or we're going to ask them to complete the Bureau of Workers' Comp, the first report of injury form. That simply is documenting in the employee's words, in the employee's handwriting, what happened, what was involved, where did it happen, what body part is involved. All of those things are important because they're all going to be used either to help the claim be allowed or to be disallowed. So the more documentation, the better. We're also going to ask that you, as a supervisor or manager, get some type of witness statements from the coworkers, anybody else in the area that maybe have saw the accident and can validate what happened. We also want to use that information to avoid future injuries. You know, if you know that there is maybe a pothole, if you will, in the walkway, we want to make sure that we document where that is. The last thing you want is for one person to be injured, a week later, the same thing to happen because, you know, everybody thought that, oh yeah, we know about that pothole, we know to avoid it. Well, let's document it so that the safety can get involved and correct the situation. As far as injury reporting, once we've got, again, everyone stabilized, we've got documents filled out, we're going to look at where are you going to send your employee for treatment. By all means, emergency room if it's warranted. You know, if there's significant loss of blood, loss of consciousness, you know, we're going to send somebody obviously to the emergency room. I would also encourage you, though, to have set up a relationship and a designated urgent care, or to look at maybe a occupational medicine center. Those are places that, number one, may be places that can see the injured worker faster, just because there isn't going to be as long as a wait as you might see in the emergency room. There are also places that are used to seeing occupational injuries. So when I worked on the employer side, I would always encourage employers to seek out a urgent care and occupational center that's close to you. Have that documented. We have posters that we could put together for you so that you've got that clearly available to your employees, to the managers, and where you would choose that they go when they're injured. I also encourage employers to contact those centers and develop a relationship there. In the event that you have an employee that comes in, that way they know to call you to gather some information. They might have documented kind of what your protocols are for return to work. You know, are you available and are you able to accommodate light duty, modified duty? If so, what are some of those modified duty tasks? So it's just nice to have those things all set up so that when an injury occurs, you've got the processes in place and people aren't scrambling to figure out what to do. Again, Andy's going to go into a little bit more information about investigating injuries. As far as when you send your employee off for treatment, there's a reference there to injury reporting forms. I encourage you to talk to your managed care organization to have an injury packet put together for you. That injury packet will typically include that first report of injury form, the bureau form. It may also include your own accident your own accident forms, maybe a little cheat sheet as far as phone numbers of who the claims reps will be handling those claims. And it also then should include a identification card. That card will be a good reference for the injured worker. It has the name and phone number of the managed care organization, but it also then has information for the treatment provider so that they know your employer name, your employer policy number. All of those things are used to expedite the claim reporting process to the Bureau and just to get the process rolling. There's, again, information that will be included in that injury packet. I mentioned the FROI, an accident investigation form. It may also, I neglected to mention, it may also include that Medco 14. That's sometimes referred to as like a return to work form. It's a nice form for the doctor, medical provider to fill out, and it documents what the injured worker can do. So again, I talked about restrictions and accommodating restrictions. That form is nice because it will show maybe they can lift up to 30 pounds. Maybe they can walk up to 8 hours a day. You know, it just documents not necessarily what they can't do, but what they can do. As far as looking at best practices for incident investigation, pretty I think pretty obvious. We're going to, you know, emphasize collecting all the details. We're looking at, you know, if there was a slip and a fall, what body part did they fall on? If they fell and hurt their knee, document it if it was the left knee. I mean, the specifics of right versus left is crucial when it comes to the treatment. And then also that's going to be information that the Bureau uses, again, when allowing or disallowing the claim. We talk about time is of the essence. I know there's a reference in here that we typically say to have things completed within 48 hours. Honestly, when I worked on the employer side, I would always emphasize the importance of doing things by the end of the day or by the end of the shift. You know, it just, while the information is fresh, go ahead and document it then. It's there, you know, it's fresh in your memory. It also kind of takes away that time where you're driving home from work, and whether or not you mean to, sometimes we all embellish. Well, just again, let's kind of minimize the likelihood of embellishing either way. And we simply want to document what the facts are and what the details specific to that, not necessarily kind of what we thought happened and played out in our mind. As far as evidence there, we're going to look at a couple of things I would just mention. You know, most of us carry our cell phones. That's a great source for taking pictures. So again, if there's, you know, a pothole in a walkway, or maybe there's a pool of water or some liquid, go ahead and document, take a picture of that. That's always handy to have, again, used for both sides of either allowing or disallowing a claim. So you had an injury. We've talked about where you sent the person, getting everything stable. They're at the medical provider. And then who do you call? So we got 3 parties that are involved primarily with your workers' comp claim from this aspect. We've got the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Comp, your managed care organization, and your third-party administrator. I would emphasize calling your managed care organization, your MCO, first. They're the ones touching the claim first. They're getting the medical information and then disseminating that to the Bureau of Workers' Comp and to the third-party administrator. So that's going to be your crucial call. If you don't know who your MCO is, honestly, whether or not it's Sedgwick or anyone else, if you have questions, if you want to email me, I am more than happy to look that up for you and look into that for you. And then final thoughts there, you've got a lot of people involved with a workers' comp claim and the whole workers' comp process. Don't hesitate to reach out to, again, your MCO, your third-party administrator, the Bureau. These are all organizations that are here to help you. We want to do what we can to expedite the process to make this really as easy as possible for you and for your employee, your injured worker. So please don't hesitate to call us. That's kind of why we're here, and we want to help. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Andy, who by all means is going to go into much greater detail than I did. There we go.
Okay. Thanks, Julia. Okay. Julia, are you able to change that display settings again? See if it pops up as a full screen.
Yes. Let's see.
Display settings up top.
There we go. Sorry.
And then swap. Let's see if that, I think that's what it was. Is it allowing you to do it?
It's not allowing me to do anything.
Okay. That's all right. Not a big deal. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Again, Andy Sawan with Sedgwick. So that was a great, great presentation to kind of introduce into what we need to do. After the employee, we call 911, we get the employee, to the medical care facility, we take care of them. And another thing that Julie commented on was making sure we don't forget. We want to do this as soon as possible, as soon as feasibly possible, so we don't forget anything that actually happened with it. And that's going to be very key to assuring we have a great incident investigation or accident investigation. You can use the term incident as something that could be a near miss or may have something that resulted in an injury as well. So we don't want to just put aside things that could have possibly happened. We want to make sure we look at all of it from that standpoint. So our first thing, the next slide, Julia, please. There we go. I've always been a big fan of having a mission statement. And when I go visit some of our customers, they have mission statements sitting in their front lobby office right there, talking about safety and talking about, incident investigations and what are we going to do in protecting employees. And I always thought that was very interesting because it really shows the company's commitment to safety itself and to protecting the employees, most importantly. When I was part of working with manufacturing, we would get a team together and say, okay, what's going to be our mission statement as far as safety goes? And we get together and we'd all come up with a keyword we thought was going to be very important to assuring a safe workplace. So you can put together some type of mission statement, whether it's a paragraph, 1 sentence, 2 sentences, hitting some of those key words. For example, to implement a standard incident reporting system that assures timely reporting of any incident to the appropriate personnel in order to proactively prevent injuries. This applies to all employees, visitors, and contractors. Look at some of the key words in there, right? You want to look at timely reporting is very important to make sure your accident investigations are being done. Preventing injuries, proactively preventing injuries, very key. We don't want anyone to get injured. We don't want any of our fellow employees to get injured. So we want to make sure we are proactive with it versus being reactive. And of course, protecting everyone, not just employees, but even visitors and contractors who come in with us as well. Okay. So remember, all accidents are preventable. There's no such thing. We just have to make sure that our behaviors and the decisions that we do, whether it's from the employee to supervisors to managers to upper management, those decisions are going to be correct and they're going to work for our organization. As I was at a presentation yesterday, for every action there's a reaction. We always want that positive reaction to occur. Okay. Next slide. So hopefully you have an investigation process or procedure. You know, if you're involved with safety, have a little bit to do with safety, or maybe take this information back to your organization with as far as an investigation process and what we're going to do, because that's going to be very key. It's very key in determining in showing what the effective safety program you have for your company, right? We want to demonstrate that we have a good program. We want to demonstrate it to our employees as well. And when we do our investigation and we have our form that we use, and just like any other safety program, it's not something we put on the shelf and we're done with. It's constantly evolving. We always want to make it better and better in any safety program that we have, whether it's hazard communication, fall protection, lockout, tag out, new equipment, inspections. We always want to keep it improving and getting better and better. But when we look at our investigation process, we want to look at some of the factors involved in it. The human factor of the community could be one, right? What happened there? What's the financial implications of an incident or accident that occurs? And then we can look at the regulatory portion of that as well. So let's move on and discuss on the next slide what our first one of human factor and community would be. Well, obviously the main thing we want to do is preventing the injury from occurring again in the future. And as we go through these, we're going to see some of them jumping onto other areas as well. So we may find some repeat, but it all means the same thing. We want to learn to improve, right? We want to always constantly learn better, improve better, and that demonstrates great for the employees and for the organization as well. Obviously, we want to keep our fellow workers safe. We want to keep ourselves safe, but we want to keep our fellow workers safe. We don't want to have to, as we jump ahead a little bit, we don't want to have to call a family member to say that their spouse or their aunt or their uncle or their child or whatever is in the hospital because of an injury that occurred. That's probably not a phone call. If any of you have had to do it, probably something you don't want to do. Okay. And we all want to go to work the same way, go home the same way we came to work. We don't want to leave any differently. We want to make sure we have our 10 fingers and 10 toes and everything else. We want to rely on, employees want to rely on their supervisors, managers, upper management to make sure that we have a safe workplace as well. We want to make sure that effective incident investigation demonstrates to employers in a community that our organization is a safe workplace, especially maybe if you work in a small community, right? You have one big employer. You want to have a good reputation, for people to work there and come and work for your organization. And that's really anywhere, but sometimes it occurs in some of those smaller communities more. Avoiding negative publicity. We certainly don't want to see that. Nothing worse for an organization than any type of negative publicity, as we see on the media probably daily about some of that. So we want to make sure we minimize that. And then one of the key things we want to do is increasing that morale and productivity also. That's going to be very key. Studies have shown that a safe workplace increases that morale and that productivity also. All right. So let's jump to the financial. Pretty obvious what it is. That affects the bottom line of the company, right? The injuries, the number of claims, the costs coming from that bottom line. If we can minimize that, that's certainly going to be more beneficial for the company and the employees as well. That money that we use takes, for the injuries, we can use that for other resources. We can use that for safety. We can use that to improve processes, to add more lines, to increase that bottom line revenue as well. Obviously, those increased workers' compensation costs are going to increase the cost on that bottom line, right? We want to make sure that we are minimizing those workers' comp claims also. Okay. And then less worker comp claims, the better program options we have for the company as well. Again, they can take that money and put it into other resources that's going to benefit the company and all the employees as well. And then finally, we have the regulatory portion of it. You know, for some incidences that actually have to be reported to OSHA, we want to make sure we do a good investigation with it. If OSHA comes knocking on the door and they ask and they see these injuries and they see our OSHA log and they see what's happened, what have you done to prevent these from happening again? Well, we haven't done anything. Well, they don't like to hear that. They want to make sure that you're doing something. And if you're ignoring any of that, there are negligent and willful violations resulting because you knew that there was something wrong. Take the pothole, for example. That's a minor example, but you know that there's a problem. What are you going to do about it? If you ignore it, there could be some serious issues with that. And it's important to determine the compliance with some of those safety regulations there. We as organizations have to determine what safety and environmental regulations apply to us, depending on what equipment we have or what our process is with it. Okay. So looking at what causes an accident, we're going to get into some of these what causes an accident on it. We look at 3 different factors, and sometimes some fall into the other ones, as we see in our picture here, our slide. The worker, right? What was the worker or the employee doing, or what was their involvement, if any? We look at the environment, what was going on around them. We'll talk about it. We could look at housekeeping issues. We could look at chemical issues, you know, lighting. Who knows what that was? We'll get into those a little deeper. And then lastly, we can look at the equipment or materials, you know, powered industrial trucks they were using, any type of equipment, ladders they were climbing up. So these are some of the areas we want to address to determine what were the factors that were contributing to this accident that occurred on it. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. What causes an accident? Yeah, you can just bring them off. We can bring those all through, I guess. Just bring them all on. Yeah, keep going. Keep going. All right, worker. So we want to look at worker errors, right? That's going to be one of the key ones we want to look at. So I think there's 4 of them on this slide. So worker errors. So what was the employee doing at the time? Improper use of machinery. You know, they weren't running the machine the way they were, or the way they were told to, or the way procedures were. How about their training? Were they trained correctly on that piece of machinery itself? Were they not paying attention? A lot of times sometimes we lose focus on what's going on, or someone is talking to us off to the side. We're not really watching what we're doing. We've seen some videos from some of the customers on people not focusing and paying attention, almost resulting in an injury. Lack of focus. A lot of things going on in our lives, not only maybe at work, but also outside our personal life. That may have an effect on what's going on. Complacency. That's always been a key one we talk about a lot. You know, we've been doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And we don't really think about the potential hazards that occur because nothing has ever happened. So how do we get, and there's no answer, but how do we get people not to be so complacent? And then finally, not being aware of your surrounding, what's going on. A lot of times you see people on their phones, walking around, walking maybe through a warehouse, and they're not focusing on their surroundings and the hazards that are associated with it. And then improper inspections. You know, we have inspections for machinery. We want to make sure it's being done correctly. Okay. Then we can jump into some of the hazardous actions, right? So we look at worker errors. How about some of the hazardous actions that were occurring? Taking shortcuts. You know, maybe, you know, they want to get out so many in an hour or in a day's time because that's what they're supposed to do. So they're going to take shortcuts. Misjudging the individual's abilities, right? Again, we're with the customer that they had them doing a different job. They almost hurt themselves. And it happened a couple of times. And they said, you know what? I'm not sure if this person can do it. Now, you also got to look at the training, but they're not sure if that person can do it, if actually have those abilities to do it. Okay. And then working too fast. You know, again, we want to get done. Maybe we need to get something done by a certain time frame, break time, or whatever it is. We want to make sure that we work in a safe speed and a safe manner as well. Okay. Next one, we have faulty machinery, right? Inspections on machineries are going to be very important to do. That's why we have inspections, to make sure the machines are going to be functioning properly. Improper or inadequate guards. So people are using the guards, or they're not put on correctly, or they're causing other hazards, right? So if we use machine guards, we want to make sure that those guards do not pose a hazard in themselves. Something simple like sharp edges, okay? Electrical hazards, frayed electric cords or outlets or outlet covers that aren't on there. So there's some electrical hazards we need to be associated with. Bad housekeeping. We see that a lot too. Bad housekeeping makes for a lot of slip, slip, and fall hazards. So what do we need to look at from that standpoint? And then any type of malfunctioning equipment kind of goes along with the inspection process. Why, what's wrong with the machine? Are we ignoring it? We need to make sure that it's functioning properly. Okay. And then finally, we look at our unsafe procedures on there. Again, improper training to run that particular piece of machinery, right? They weren't trained correctly. Inadequate training. We can look at forklifts, right? Forklifts are one of the key things that OSHA's looking at. So we want to make sure employees are trained. And if something goes wrong, what's our step to retrain them on it? And how effective is the training, right? We can sit there and read till we're blue in the face on proper safety procedures and policies and techniques, but is it really sinking in? Behavior-based safety has always been a key thing in trying to change the behavior of everyone. Then we get into not following set procedures or skipping steps, kind of the same idea. Why aren't they following those procedures? Why weren't they following those procedures? Did they not know about it? Did they forget about it? How does that come into play? Okay. So then as we look at those investigations in our investigation form, some of the questions that we can consider asking ourselves, obviously the obvious one is what caused the incident? What caused that incident or accident to occur? What was happening at the time? Were work procedures involved? If they were they following those correct work procedures or not? We have procedures and policies for people to work safe and for production purposes, but if you don't follow them, what's the point? And again, how effective is that training? Effective training is going to be very key. Were the right tools being used? Many times we hear the term use the right tool for the job. I always like to use the example of people using a ladder as a scaffold, right? They put it between two chairs or something like that, and they stand on it, right? So you want to use the right tool for the job, all right? That's always going to be a key one. Safety devices, right? We have machine guards, pressure-sensitive mats maybe, or I-beam curtains, or any type of adjustable guards. We want to make sure that those were in place and they were working properly as well. A lot of times we'll go in, we'll find out that guards weren't being used properly. So that's always going to be key. Safety requirements. Again, we have policies and procedures for safety requirements. Were they violated? And a lot of times, a lot of these come down to the why. Why were they violated? What was the employee doing? Were they trained properly? So there's a lot of questions that we ask ourselves. And of course, the key is to get down to the root cause of what happened with it. If they're running the equipment and, did something happen with it? Was the inspections not done properly? Why did the equipment shut down? Why did it speed up? Why did it heat up? Why did it get hot? Who knows what it is? So those are some of the questions we want to ask ourselves. Any type of chemicals, if you handle chemicals or any hazardous substances that are involved in the potential injury itself, were they not wearing their PPE? If they're using something that burns the skin, were they not wearing their PPE? Why was that? So we want to investigate that particular portion. Machine guarding, jumping back on that, we want to make sure that all machine guarding is in place when we do our investigation. If there are machine guards, why weren't they in place? We look at personal protective equipment. We run through our job functions and for the employees, and we see what PPE is going to be required. Eye protection, maybe a hard hat, maybe gloves, getting the specific type of gloves. Not all gloves are going to protect against all chemicals. So we want to make sure they're using the proper PPE when they're doing that. Housekeeping conditions, always key. We see some places that do a great job at housekeeping, other ones that need to maybe set up the procedure a little better, whether it's done every couple hours, depending on what you do, every 4 hours at the end of each shift, just keeping things clean. Okay. Noise is always a key thing with potential injuries, right? People can't hear, so it's very hard for them to hear what's going on around them. So you got to evaluate, was that possibly something that contributed to the injury as well? And then along the same lines of noise, we can look at adequate lighting also, right? That kind of falls under the housekeeping as well. So that's going to be key. And then we jump on to the next slide in some cases gets into more of the psychological aspect of it, right? So again, we don't know what's going on outside of people's lives, okay? But these are some of the things we want to ask. Was the employee tired? You know, when we get tired, or where drugs or alcohol kind of affects our brain, and we're slow, a little slow more response than what we normally are. So we want to make sure we investigate, was the employee tired? Were there drugs or alcohol involved as well? Hopefully not, but you never know. That's why you evaluate that. Safety work instructions enforced in the area. So now we have what's our upper management, our safety, our managers, our upper management doing, supervisors doing to assure that things are being enforced in the workplace, right? It's only as good as the enforcement of it. We can write up policies, we can write up procedures, we can train people, but if it's not enforced, what's the point of it? Okay, we always encourage using safety and disciplinary action with employees. Otherwise, you say, hey, don't do that again, and you ignore it and you ignore it and you ignore it, and all of a sudden something happens. So you need to be serious about it, all right? Adequate supervision, right? Forklift training, for example. Employees who are learning to drive a forklift can practice, which is perfectly fine, but they've got to be supervised until they're actually signed off on it, okay? So you want to make sure they're being adequately supervised, okay? If you bring temps in, same idea. Ask yourself that question. What were they being supervised adequately? If we've looked at those hazards before, again, talking about the pothole example, talking about that, did we address it? If we didn't address it, why not, right? We don't want to have any of that negligence or willful violations that are there. Equipment as part of a regular maintenance activity, we want to look at that as well. If there was maintenance done or not done, or it was inspected through maintenance, but nothing was done to fix it, that's going to be an issue there. Outside activities that might have contributed to the incident itself. These might be a little tougher. People having maybe personal issues at home or whatever else, that could be key in it as well. Adequately trained. Was the employee adequately trained, and were they effectively trained as well? Again, you can train till you're blue in the face, but until it actually takes in, it absorbs into them. And that's always the key, is you can review, you can go over training month after month and year after year, but how do we get that to sink in, right? We want to make sure that it's being in, and that's the trick. That's kind of the trick to the safety portion of it. Kind of getting into the other ones, the employee's health. Were they sick? Whether physically or mentally, something, they're dealing with that we have to contend with also. And then looking at what was not normal, before the incident. Maybe there was something different. Maybe there was a lot of accumulation of something on the ground that may have contributed to somebody slipping or forklift slipping or whatever the case may be. So these are some of the questions we need to ask ourselves and investigate. And this is stuff you can take and put into your own investigation process. There's a lot of investigation process and forms out there, but create it for your own organization, because you're going to find things that may not be on the forms that you have. So create it for yourself. All right. So things to consider, obviously, photos of the accident scene. Pictures say a lot, right? We all have a tendency to forget, because that's just the way it is. So if we take pictures, that's going to help us out. Drawing sketches and measurements, distances, whatever that may be, may help us determine that factors into that incident. Data, maybe we have data on machinery. What was going on? Was it going too fast? Was it going too slow? Was the machine overheating? What was going on at the time, depending on that particular equipment? Who was involved? What people were involved with it? Okay, how do we know what people were involved that may have contributed to the incident itself? Date, time, and location are always going to be important. Time is always important. It could be at the beginning of shift. It could be before break. It could be before lunch. It could be before they're going on vacation for a week and they want to get done. So these are things we want to consider as well. Any of the activities at the time of the accident, what was going on around? Again, Was there a lot of noise going on? Were there groups walking around? Who knows what it is? People's attention being taken away. Obviously, the equipment that's involved as well. We want to take a look at that. We want to look at list of witnesses. We're going to talk about that on how to talk to witnesses, right? We want to make sure we gather that information from the witnesses because that's going to be very, very useful. And then finally, OSHA reportable. There are certain incidences that occur that we have to actually report to OSHA. And if you do, they're going to want to see, okay, we need you to tell us some information about what happened with that. So it's one thing to do it from the OSHA standpoint, but of course, for prevention of the injury from occurring again or minimizing it from occurring again. So getting into meeting with witnesses, obviously, what did you see? It's a good idea to do a one-on-one with the witnesses because they may be concerned if someone else is there, they're talking, that's sitting there listening to them. So we want to do a one-on-one and asking them, what led up to the incident? Did you see something that happened? Did you witness any unsafe actions? Tell them the reason why you need to gather this information. And hopefully they're going to be upfront with you. You want them to be upfront. You want to encourage that atmosphere to be upfront in the purpose of doing this. What did you hear? Machines didn't sound normal. Maybe there you saw a forklift or something that seemed to be skidding, or there's a grinding noise or something was happening there. Were they sitting? Were they standing? Were you able to actually see what happened? Maybe get an idea. What do you think caused it? Did you see, again, somebody not following the rules? Did you see a machine guard that wasn't in proper placement? Maybe employee was driving too fast, right? Again, we want to get down to the point of why the injury occurred. We want to encourage them to be honest and truthful with you, okay? Anything different today than normal? Lighting was a little off. Maybe it was dustier than normal. Maybe it was hotter. Maybe it was a lot colder, okay? Some of the conditions that may have affected that from today versus what it was yesterday. And finally, keep an open mind when you're talking to any witnesses, okay? You want to be friendly, but you want to be professional, right? You want to gather just the facts. We want to make no judgments or statements, and then conduct those interviews one-on-one are going to be key as well. So now that we've kind of gathered, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to throw in, I like the idea of when meeting with the witnesses, I like the idea of kind of including them so that they feel like they are part of the solution. And I think what greater way to get buy-in from the organization is that they just getting that collaborative effort. So
yes. Yeah, I think that's very key. And I think it's also important that you encourage them to speak up, because that's what you want. You want to encourage a safe atmosphere. And I think meeting with the witnesses is going to be key because they're the ones I hope that may have seen what happened. So so now that we've done our investigation, we've done our research, we want to look at some of those corrective actions that we want to do. Corrective action is going to be very key, right? We can do the best investigation and research, but we have to have effective corrective actions, right? So the incident, whether it's potentially a near miss, somebody does get injured, we want to make sure we have some type of corrective action, what it's going to be. For example, you see somebody driving a forklift and they hit a beam or they drop a load or something like that. Well, we may have to look at that retraining and find out. A lot of that requires automatic retraining. Some of that does. So we want to look at that. What can be done maybe come as a team and say, what can be done to prevent that incident from reoccurring again? I mean, that's kind of the ultimate thing, is what can be done to prevent that. And there may be more than just one solution. So we want to look at that. Okay. Document, if you've been on any of our 2-hour training, document all the stuff you do, you want to document it, right? If you don't document it, it never occurred. Okay. So you can say you did it, but until you prove it, it doesn't occur. Okay. And you want to implement, and the key is you want to follow up too. It's one thing to say, yeah, we'll look into it. It should be fine. But you want to follow up with it and prove that you're doing something. That says a lot for the organization. And it says a lot when the employees see that things are actually being done and corrective actions are being done. It's always good to talk about some of those, inform employees of those corrective action items. What are we doing? This is what we're doing to prevent this from happening again. Oh, by the way, maybe you have some good ideas that we can help implement as well. Okay. And really important is following up with those corrective actions. Okay. Again, we can say forever that we're gonna fix them, but you have to actually do it. Okay, so you want to make sure, because that's going to assure that positive outcome, and it's going to prove that things are being done, and that's going to be key with it as well. Okay, and then finishing up with some corrective action pitfalls, so things we may fall into that we want to try to avoid. Not measuring the effectiveness over time of a corrective action we did. Remember, safety isn't a one-time thing. We might have to look at it again and say, was that the best thing? Or somebody comes back to us and says, you know what, I think this might be better. So we want to continue to look at that to make it even better, to improve it. Root cause analysis, you've probably heard of that before. You want to, they say, ask the question, why, and then that gets you to the root cause in some cases. So we want to make sure we get a deep root cause analysis and not just ask that question, why, once or twice. Okay. Lessons aren't shared, right? Something happens, we want to share it with other employees, with the organization, to say, what lessons did we learn to make, to assure the safe workplace? What did we learn? What can we share with everybody else? Long closure times, okay? Deadline are always going to be key to having effective corrective action. The longer it takes and we don't make a deadline, we have a tendency to push it down the road because we're all busy. We all have things to do. All of a sudden, something falls down. So make a deadline, make a calendar when you're going to have these done, so you can stick to that. Administrative faults. Sometimes we're only as effective as maybe what upper management is going to allow us to do. So we need to address that. If we're not getting the support we need, how do we address that particular one as well? Avoid comments. Obviously, we know corrective actions like, oh, you need to work safer, or you need to be more careful next time, or you need to be more aware or attentive, right? That's probably not going to be very effective, because that just doesn't work, right? We need to get down to that. We'll get again on number 2. We want to get down to that root cause as to why it happened. And then finally, playing the blame game. We don't want to play the blame game, right? That's just going to get for a bad atmosphere with all the people involved. So you got to keep an open mind when you do your incident investigations. And then finally, not having an open mind or having a biased attitude, that's going to be key too. So keep that open mind. If you need a team to get together on the incident investigation, sometimes that helps out from the various departments of expertise. So I believe that's it. Yes, I think we're done on that one.
Excellent.
right.
Any questions?
Julia and Andy, would you like to articulate your contact information?
Perfect. I'm at julia.bowling@sedgwick.com.
And I am Andrew.Sawan@sedgwick.com.
All right. Anybody have any questions today?
I kind of have a question. Julia, you mentioned that you could send people some, posters or charts or, whatever. Do they just reach out to you directly to get those, or how would they do that?
That would be perfect. That'd be perfect.
Definitely send that to us too, Julia.
Okay,
And then if anybody has that, then I can forward it to them also.
perfect. And I have information, even if you want to put it out on the Chamber's website as resources, we're more than happy to do so. We got checklists and little flow charts. Yes.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Okay,
Actually, I think that
perfect.
could we do that as a link to our e-newsletter?
Perfect.
Yeah, we could.
And then we can put it on the website as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we could do all those things.
Excellent.
All
Well,
right.
thank you very much, everyone.
I think
Thank
this was
you.
something that in a past life I was more involved with, like car insurance and accidents and stuff. Make sure you have that kit. Make sure when the injury occurs, you're not thinking clearly, you're kind of in crisis. So make sure you have written down what your protocol is, what you should do, and make sure all your employees are aware of what that is. So when something happens, you have a guidebook to go to, as opposed to everybody going, what do we do now? So because if someone's injured and they're in pain or whatever, and you have to call 911 and all, you need to be thinking clearly. And I would highly recommend that you have posted, someplace visible for all employees to see what happens if.
And Dan, I think, hopefully most employers have monthly or some routinely safety meetings. I encourage people to go through those injury packets, go through what to do, like you said, just so everyone's at least familiar with the forms and understanding why it's important, not necessarily from a punitive standpoint, but just so everyone understands, the more information, the better, to help get the claim allowed also. I mean, I've seen situations where the Bureau may disallow a claim and the employer is saying, wait, no, we agree with this. We want this claim to be allowed. That documentation just assists with that, that process.
Right.
Well, thank you again.
Well, thank you,
Thank you.
Julie and Andy. We're glad to have you with us today.
I think it was great information.
A lot of great
Excellent.
information.
Thank
I
you,
mean, it's
everyone.
something that hopefully employers aren't using very often, but it's
Right.
definitely important for the employer, the employee, anybody involved in the situation to understand the importance of all the protocol, because like you said, I mean, the claim could get denied or could get approved based upon, certain information being available. And if it's a week later and you're trying to write a report up, or even a day later, it may not be easy to remember all the details and get all the information correct.
Exactly.
All right, so we
Okay.
appreciate you two being with us today. We will be back for our next coffee on Tuesday, March 12th at 9 a.m. Robert Wolfram with Social Evo Media will be our presenter. He will be discussing building brand awareness and generating revenue using social media content. So we're excited to hear from him. We will see you all in a couple weeks then.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.